Welcome to our third topic on IB Biology, topic 4, ecology. We are looking at Unit 4.3, carbon cycling. Okay, so in this unit we're going to be looking at the carbon cycle, and in front of us here we can see a basic carbon cycle. Okay, it's in that we've got living organisms, we've got our trees and our cows, so our animals there. We've got the sun and the energy coming into our carbon cycle to make those energy-rich carbon compounds. Okay, we've got carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we've got burning fossil fuels and things like that. So that's a really basic carbon cycle to give you the idea of what we're going to cover in this video. Okay, so thinking about carbon, and we've talked about carbon a lot, especially in the unit topic 1, unit 1.1, unit 1.2. Okay, so carbon is the backbone of all of our biomacromolecules. It's the second most abundant element by mass after oxygen. Okay, it forms the chemical basis of all known living things, and it appears in many forms both in the biotic and the abiotic parts of our ecosystems. So biotic being living and abiotic being non-living. Okay, we're going to look at carbon sinks and carbon reservoirs now. So a reservoir or a sink, okay, this is a place where a certain element, we're looking at carbon, a place where a certain element, such as carbon, has accumulated or pooled. So let's have a think about, first of all, our carbon fixation. Okay, so we've got our autotrophs, all right, and they absorb this atmospheric carbon dioxide and convert it to carbohydrates, lipids, and all the other carbon compounds they require through the process of photosynthesis. So what that means is, yes, the glucose is made through photosynthesis, but photosynthesis has got to occur for all those other compounds to then be made. Okay, these carbon molecules can then be consumed by consumers. So all those molecules, those carbohydrates, lipids, and those other molecules then get eaten or consumed by the consumers. Photosynthesis has the effect of reducing atmospheric carbon dioxide. So those autotrophs are taking carbon dioxide in from the atmosphere and converting them into these other products. Okay, so photosynthesis reduces the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide. It takes that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So photosynthesis occurring inside cells of autotrophs reduces the amount of carbon dioxide within the autotroph. Okay, so if you think about it, if an autotroph has got carbon dioxide within its structure, that would then be used through the process of photosynthesis, so it reduces the use. So this sets up what we call this concentration gradient, with higher concentrations of carbon dioxide outside cells in the air or the water, whatever is surrounding the cells. Carbon dioxide can therefore diffuse. It's a small molecule, so it diffuses from the atmosphere or water, which is a high concentration, into the autotroph, which has a lower concentration. So remembering these concentration gradients that we talked about in the previous unit. Okay, now once in the autotroph, it's then used for photosynthesis. Now just thinking about this whole idea of carbon dioxide in water, so carbon dioxide in solution. Now carbon dioxide is soluble in water. It can remain as a dissolved gas or can combine with the water to form carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid can dissociate to form hydrogen and hydrogen carbonate ions. This explains how carbon dioxide can actually reduce the pH of water. Okay, both dissolved carbon dioxide and hydrogen carbonate ions are absorbed by aquatic plants, and they use them in photosynthesis to make carbohydrates and other carbon compounds. Okay, so we've got carbon in our plants, where that carbon dioxide has been fixed in the plants. We've got carbon in water, carbon dioxide or carbon ions fixed in the water. Now, peat. Peat is partially decomposed plant material that can be used as a fossil fuel. Now, peat forms when organic matter is not fully decomposed because of anaerobic conditions and in waterlogged soil. Normally, soil contains air spaces, providing an oxygen supply for our saprotrophs. Remember, we've spoken about them in our previous video. So those saprotrophs such as fungi and bacteria that would normally decompose dead organic material, but because we've got all the water, we've not got the oxygen, it's an anaerobic condition, therefore we've not got those organisms breaking down the plant material. So instead, the soil becomes permanently waterlogged, as in wetlands, and the soil becomes anaerobic. Now, saprotrophs are unable to survive, so dead material does not get fully decomposed. This leads to the formation of acidic conditions, further inhibiting any saprotrophs from developing. Many energy-rich molecules that would normally be decomposed are then left behind and transformed over thousands of years into energy-rich peat. Now, in order to use peat as a fuel, it's cut from the ground and it has to be dried out. So if you ever get the chance to go to Ireland, you will quite often see piles and piles of peat across the landscape where it's been dug from the peat bogs and it's just drying, ready to be used on fires and ready to heat homes. Now, peat is considered to be a non-renewable energy source because it takes so long to form. Due to its dampness, it's also quite hard to burn. Okay, fossilised organic matter and coal. Now, the pressure and heat cause transformations associated with lithification. So that means the transformation of solid sediments into solid rock. So back in year 8, you looked at the rock cycle. Okay, and you learned that for a sedimentary rock to turn to a metamorphic rock or even an igneous rock, it had to undergo heat and or pressure. And that's the same to form our coal. We've got peat, and that peat needs to be heated and under pressure to undergo the process of lithification, where the molecules get really, really compact and rearrange into what we call hydrocarbons. Now, the carbon-hydrogen bonds hold significant amounts of energy. Okay, and because there are many of them in the long chains of hydrocarbon molecules, they're really rich in energy and they are released through burning, so combustion reactions. It makes coal a very high energy material. So peat is still carbohydrates, whereas coal has now been converted into these hydrocarbons. Now, the pressure and heat cause chemical. We've already said that, ignore that, but look at the picture. Just showing the age of the coal formation. Okay, you're looking at plants and animals that lived on land like 30,000 years ago. Okay, so we've looked at coal. Now we're going to look at crude oil and natural gas. Now, oil and natural gas, the reason I say crude oil is because I am talking about oil that's taken from the land. I'm not talking about your vegetable oils and things like that. So it is actually called crude oil. So oil and natural gas formed in mud at the bottom of seas and lakes were anoxic. Now, oil and gas is formed under lakes and seas. Coal is formed from land organisms. Now, the conditions for crude oil and natural gas to form are anaerobic. And so the dead algae and zooplankton were not fully decomposed, instead forming layers of sediment and mud. As more mud and sediments are deposited, then partially decomposed matter is compressed and heated. Chemical changes then occur, which results in complex mixtures of liquid carbon compounds and gases. These compounds are then known as crude oil and natural gas. Methane forms the largest part of natural gas, and we've looked at methane. We've done that weird comparison early on between methane and water. It's all going to start making sense now. So deposits of crude oil and gas are found where there are porous rocks that can hold them. So for example, shale. Surrounded top and bottom by non-porous rocks or impervious rocks, preventing their escapes. You always have your cap rocks and your base rocks with the oil and gas forming in between. And this is showing our crude oil and natural gas formation. You'll see it's called petroleum there. Petroleum is a fraction of crude oil. So crude oil is a mixture of all different hydrocarbons. Petroleum is one of those. This takes us back to the peat formation here. Okay, so another carbon sink that we had. Remember, we're looking at carbon sinks and reservoirs here. So our coal, our crude oil and natural gas, they all hold a large amount of carbon. Okay, our autotrophs hold a large amount of carbon where they've fixed them from the atmosphere. Okay, now limestone also holds a large amount of carbon. Now, some animals have hard body parts, and this is composed of what we call calcium carbonate. Some marine organisms take dissolved carbon out of the water and use it to make their carbonate shells. So we're looking at anything with a shell, many sea animals with hard exoskeletons. So mollusk shells, so snail shells, contain calcium carbonate. Hard corals that build reefs to produce their exoskeletons by secreting calcium carbonate. When these animals die, their soft bodies decompose, and in acidic conditions, the calcium carbonate dissolves away. But in neutral or alkaline conditions, it is stable, and the deposits of it then form the seabed. And that gets compact with more and more pressure, and that forms what we call limestone. Now, limestone has been used for many years in buildings, so the Great Pyramids, Notre Dame in France, and it's even still a major ingredient in cement. Okay, so we've looked at our carbon reservoirs and our carbon sinks. Okay, so we've got limestone, our fossil fuels and peat, we've got our autotrophs, okay, all those carbon reservoirs, water, air. Now, carbon fluxes. A flux is the process that moves an element from one reservoir or sink to another. So we're looking at process now. Okay, so we've got that release of carbon dioxide from cellular respiration. That's a flux. Carbon dioxide is a waste product of aerobic respiration. It is produced in all cells that carry out aerobic respiration, including non-photosynthetic cells and produce it, for example, root cells in plants, animal cells, saprotrophs, e.g. fungi. Carbon dioxide is produced by respiration. It diffuses out of cells and passes into the atmosphere or water. So respiration is a flux. It's moving carbon from the sink of the carbohydrate or the carbon compound to the water or the air. Methane. Methane is a carbon gas. Okay, so CH4, 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens. It's produced from organic matter under anaerobic conditions, meaning that, without oxygen. You know what anaerobic means, okay? By a methanogenic archaean. So this is a type of bacteria. These bacteria are found in several anoxic environments, for example, wetlands and the guts of ruminants. Now, methane may either accumulate underground or it can diffuse into the atmosphere. So we've already said that natural gas is a sink of carbon, which it is. But the process of that then methane moving from the carbohydrate in a producer when it's digested by a cow, that's a flux. Now, methane is the main ingredient in our fossil fuels. We've said that in our fossil fuel natural gas. Okay, so methane is the main gas of natural gas. Carbon dioxide was removed from the atmosphere by photosynthesis millions of years ago. It then took methane gas millions of years to form and accumulate underground. When we burn natural gas, we return the carbon to the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. So by burning, carbon is there as in natural gas as a sink, but when we burn that methane, we then release the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And you can see the reaction here. You've got methane and oxygen, and the products from that combustion is water and carbon dioxide. Methane gas is naturally oxidized to carbon dioxide and water in the atmosphere. Okay, so molecules of methane released into the atmosphere persist there for about 12 years. This explains why atmospheric concentrations of methane are not high in the atmosphere. And we'll get on to that further when we're looking at global warming in our next unit. All right, so I just mentioned combustion, and carbon dioxide is produced by the combustion of biomass and fossilized organic matter. So the chemists in here will know that carbon dioxide and water are always the products of combustion reactions. When organic matter is ignited, it will burn with the presence of oxygen, and the oxidation reaction that occurs are called combustion reactions. The products of complete combustion are carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide is released from the combustion of biomass and in natural fires in grasslands and forests. Okay, so if there's bushfires, carbon dioxide is released. In areas where fires are regular occurrence, vegetation is adapted to regenerate after that fire. Humans use fire as a means of cleaning land, for example in tropical rainforests to allow for the planting of oil palms or for cattle grazing. Humans have used fire to clear lands for thousands of years in Australia. Our indigenous population used fire to clear the land very effectively so that they could get the new foliage growing, which obviously had good bush food in it. So looking a bit further at combustion, we've already talked about it. We've said that coal, oil and natural gas are all fossilized organic matter. They burn through a combustion reaction. Okay, and the carbon compounds in these fossil fuels are from plants that photosynthesized millions of years ago. Okay, bringing everything together now. We have this thing called the carbon cycle, which we looked at briefly at the start. Now, it is in the nature of science to quantify processes and to use models, and that's what the carbon cycle is. It's a model of a process. The size of the carbon pools and the flux of this element can be measured or estimated. So you can put values on these things, as you can see in this picture. Now, whenever we're talking about carbon flux, we're talking in gigatons. Okay, and here we're looking at gigatons per year. Again, looking in gigatons. Okay, your applications and skills for this unit. Again, it's the estimation of those carbon fluxes due to processes in the carbon cycle, being able to analyse data from air monitoring stations and explain annual fluctuations, and to be able to construct a carbon cycle. So if you were to construct a diagram of the carbon cycle, you need to be able to produce a simplified carbon cycle. You need to use the following sinks and fluxes, that should say fluxes, to build your carbon cycle. So the sinks and reservoirs, you've got that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as a pool of inorganic carbon. You've got biomass of producers in ecosystems as that organic pool. Now your fluxes, you've got atmospheric carbon dioxide conversion by photosynthesis into plant mass. Always remembering that you've got carbon fluxes are measured in gigatons. Other fluxes you might have respiration. Okay, so that's that organic matter then being broken down and carbon dioxide being released. And we've looked at a whole range of sinks and fluxes through this PowerPoint that you would include. When drawing a diagram representing the carbon cycle, text boxes are used to show sinks and arrows are used to represent your fluxes. Okay, so the other application skill that you had there was this environmental monitoring. Now, making accurate quantitative measurements, okay, it is important to obtain reliable data on the concentration of carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere. Both of these gases have very important effects. Carbon dioxide concentrations affect the rate of photosynthesis and the pH of seawater. So remember that carbon dioxide dissolving in the seawater. Both gases influence global temperatures and so the extent of ice sheets at the poles. Therefore, they indirectly affect sea levels, ocean currents, rainfall distribution, and the severity of extreme weather events. The carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere is currently higher than any time in the past 20 million years. Human activities have increased the carbon dioxide and methane concentrations in the Earth's atmosphere. We're going to look at this further in the next video on global warming. Human activity will cause atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations to rise from 397 micromoles per mole in 2014 to a level above 600 by the end of the century. It is essential that we have regular and reliable monitoring of these gases. The Manuel Observatory on Hawaii has been monitoring carbon dioxide concentrations since 1959 and methane since 1984. Okay, so here we have some of their data. That other graph should have been after this one. Here we have some of the data from Hawaii. Okay, and you can see the rises and falls in or the annual fluctuations in the carbon dioxide. The same is shown here, but just in a little bit more depth as such. This is going from 1960 to 2009. This is 2003 to 2008. So it's just, that's a wider scale there. The red line is the average. It's showing the trend, so it's a trend line. So just a basic representation of our carbon cycle again. The arrows being the fluxes, the rectangles being the sinks. And that's the end of our video on the carbon cycle. Looking forward to joining you in our next video on global warming.